Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newswrap, featuring some of the biggest names in the world of TV. This week, we have an exclusive interview with George Kay, the creator of Netflix's Lupin, who tells John Elmes how one goes about creating a smash hit for a streamer. And later, to mark the halfway point of the year, the Newswrap team talk flight attendants, Russell T Davies drama, weird house formats and snooker documentaries in a very special What We've Been Watching. All that coming up on this week's Broadcast Newswrap.
One of the things that I've been interested about Lupin is, and it's the same with many Netflix shows, there is no rhyme or reason to what makes a Netflix show successful. They just appear, they just happen, they drop and they become instant successes, or they don't become instant successes. Yeah. From your perspective as a creator, but also someone who observes the industry and has experienced like lots of different dramas and drama projects, why does Lupin feel compulsive viewing, or has reached the level of interest and intrigue and demand that it has done going into its second part?
Well, I love lots of terrestrial drama commissions in the UK, so it's not. But I think that there's a schedule thing with the UK, for example, that there are just certain time slots that are not devoted to scripted drama. That perhaps if they were, then you would open up a whole sort of new canon of stuff. You know, like if you look at anything across the board at 8 o'clock, pre-watershed drama outside of the soaps doesn't really exist. I mean, there's Ackley Bridge, I think, but you know what Lupin is technically is kind of 1980s, 1990s US network drama. It's family, it's adventure, it's kind of looking for a big family audience, and it's pre-watershed. And in fact, there's so much emphasis, not just on our channels, but in cable in the US and a lot of streamer stuff, which is aimed at kind of what one might call 9 o'clock serialized, slightly dark skewing drama. That we've left behind this huge space, which is the shows that I'm older than you, I think, but I grew up watching, you know, all of these kind of great US network. They used to be acquired by Channel 4 and ITV, and Quantum Leap, X-Files, you're going right back to, you know, even real sort of what I would call tea time drama, A-Team, MacGyver, you know, Britain had its equivalents. They're very few and far between. And so actually, you know, at a time of lockdown when part one dropped, and you know, that was one of the few times when people perhaps did want to watch things as families. So maybe there was a nice kind of chime between those two factors. But and there's also quite a lot of Universal's themes in Lupin. You know, it's super French, but there's a father and a son, and father's relationship with his late father, and you know that chain of father, son, grandfather runs through it, and then maybe a little bit of topicality with Black Lives Matter was happening while we were filming part one, and we were able to kind of explore some societal issues, stuff about race, but we were able to do it in what's quite a positive show. We were able to smuggle in some of that stuff and not have a Sandy Op burdened by it the whole time, or he could use it in a positive way for his own ends rather than wear it too heavily.
Yeah. Was when you were making it, did you want to kind of almost do an homage to that 8 p.m. drama, not the high concept, edgy, serialized drama? Did you want to make something more accessible and lean back, as opposed to some of the other stuff you've made in the past?
I didn't want to make it violent. I didn't want to make it dark. If you meet Omar Sy, he smiles at you, and then the world just improves. And so I just was so struck by that I thought that the audience would automatically agree. You can charm the world, you know. And so really it was kind of storylining it and finding the tone based around Omar as a performer. I got really, really excited about the idea of a family show. There's so few, I was thinking about, it's weird, if you think about British shows that the whole family watch, you think about stuff like Gavin and Stacey. They're very few and far between. They're things that everyone wants to get around the TV and see. Yeah. And I was just thinking, this guy Omar is he's got that. And so what's the show, and what are those adventures, and how can we have fun? So that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. If I take something like Criminal as well, and I know that you created Criminal with your colleague at Idiot Lamp Jim Field-Smith, and you know, created the UK version and were all across that. But you also, as you say, wrote on the French version, and I believe produced on the internet the whole procedural concept. Did you always want to plan to move into kind of international drama projects, having previously done things which feel very different to the kind of things that you're now doing?
Before I was a writer, I was in factual development, and so distribution was something that was always I really enjoy that stuff. What are the formats? What TV shows travel? And so when I was devising Criminal, I actually thought, this is a great challenge as a writer to try and sort of box myself into these 3 rooms. But also, you know, if we get those 3 rooms right, then that's a sort of program that we could actually sell that. That could become a format. You know, I was, you know, around the time of In Treatment, even, you know, you think of very simple drama formats and you see how they travel. So Criminal has a kind of In Treatment feel, just with crime, I guess. Just an excuse to explore character, some more than perhaps procedural. But what wasn't anticipated at any level was the idea of show running different versions of it and shooting those at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, is playing with form one of the particular habits or practices that you like to do? I mean, as a creator, to test yourself in those ways, and what would you want to do next?
Yeah, I mean, I do like to play around with the different grammar of telly, and when I was writing Criminal, I think I did the second run of Criminal. You know, I wasn't writing anything else as I was writing those 4 episodes in a quick run, and just at the same time, Lupin was beginning. And I was just such a sort of, I felt like I'd been released into the sort of wild, because suddenly I could, you know, set a scene outside or with like 10 people in it, or, you know, and so it was a big release for me to kind of explore. Maybe that has something to do with how kind of ambitious some of the scale is in Lupin. But no, I think the more you do, the more you want to write character and find the right character's sort of place in the world. And so format is fun, structure's fun, but no, it's led by character, hopefully. But I do like the formats of TV for sure.
Sure. Given that you know your last 2 series, albeit Criminal obviously has Criminal UK, and that's what you were across completely, and that was all your work, and you show ran the rest of them, and now Lupin, you've done programs that are really international projects, you know, really like, and it's not common, I would say, for UK creatives to go so wholeheartedly into international projects. Do you think that there's a kind of a barrier from UK creators to want to try and do that? Did you feel they should be doing it more? Are they closing themselves off by focusing on the domestic market or English language projects?
Well, you know, I think that I'm very stubborn in that I'll have a project and a script that I want to try and sell, and I'll go to if one commissioner turns it down, I'll keep going, and you know, to the point where, you know, you just wait for the person that was there once upon a time who turned it down first to be replaced by someone else, and you go. But you know, I really get really passionate about the projects you're trying to pitch, and certain things I just won't let go. And so, you know, now we have so many opportunities to sell our scripted content that there are so many buyers, and there's so many different streamers and opportunities and platforms that really you can go looking in all sorts of places if you believe enough in your characters and your story. Unless it's super location specific, there's nothing to stop you going to Australia or Canada or the US to sell your show. Netflix will buy stuff in all territories from writers of all backgrounds and countries. It's just about your comfort level of working, if you do want to go down that road of working with producers in those countries and in a different language. Ultimately, I mean, Lupin, I write right through to shooting script in English, and then with a very trusted producer and a very good English-speaking cast, we translate it at the last minute. So it's a full English process. Right. Otherwise, I don't know how we'd do it. But no, I think that people should pitch wherever they can the projects they care about, and try and find just because a TV channel turns you down, it's often for their reasons rather than yours, because they don't have the slots. I mean, Criminal and Lupin, I couldn't place those shows on terrestrial TV in the UK. You think through those channels and where and who would buy that.
Did you try and pitch those kind of, the idea of because Criminal I could definitely see on a UK.
It's true, maybe now. I mean, I started Criminal a long time ago, and at the time it didn't feel perhaps like people would buy it. I mean, you can't really see Criminal on 9 o'clock on a BBC One or an ITV just because it's such a specific visual, I think. But there's probably scope. You're right, but I didn't want to compromise on the idea at any point. Lupin was just born out of a Netflix dialogue with Omar. The work I've done and I'm doing in the UK is squarely aimed at what I think hopefully people want to buy in the UK a little bit more strategically.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You mentioned that you wrote and created Lupin in English first and then at the last minute translated. Was it difficult to create a show knowing that you would have to work with different production values, different kind of production expectations for a French show, as opposed to what you've done with some of your other projects?
Well, Lupin was an interesting one because for the first time, or one of the first times, a French drama was budget-wise, in terms of personnel and the ambitions of it, was rising up to meet what we would consider the kind of normal or slightly higher budget level. So Louis Leterrier is a French director who did the opening block of Lupin, but is LA-based and has done a lot of American movies, and so they were really going for the bigger version of their show. I think Lupin is one of France's highest budget dramas. I don't think it's a massive budget drama in the global sense, but it's a notch above a lot of the things that happen in France. So actually, I was able to. I wrote Interior Louvre Day in my first script, and expecting that to change, but then they came back and said yes. So there was money up front at the start, and there was a lot of ambition for it. So that was great. It felt like the only new things I suppose were editing processes, the time that normally people take to shoot an episode in France. It was a change for them rather than it was for me. They shoot drama in France in an hour in 12 days or something, whereas it was longer than that.
Sure. Given that you're a UK creative, created what a lot of people are calling the breakout hit of 2021 in Lupin because it's had the most traction, and you're saying you wouldn't be able to get that away on a terrestrial. Do you think that sometimes these kind of shows send a message to our PSBs that they might want to try and put a Lupin on at 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. on a Wednesday evening?
I don't know. It's really hard to tell. It's something for them probably, but Netflix has many more hours to play with, I suppose, many more rolls of the dice, and you can play with lots more ideas for content. Also, the schedules are so rigid. There are certain places in the schedules that people are not investing in certain types of, and it's a brave controller that messes with all that and rolls the dice on the show, and especially with something that's meant to be playful or comedic, or because that's sort of great unknowable. I think it's quite hard to get those right from a commissioner standpoint, because who quite knows? I mean, I'd imagine, I have never done that job, but like who knows what's funny and how that funniness will travel or not, and it's quite a sort of hard one to get right.
Yeah. We have a wonderful section in our podcast, in our Newswrap podcast. It's our favourite section. It's called What We've Been Watching, and It would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to ask you, George, what have you been watching?
I'm very slow at watching telly. I recently watched, I think it's 72 films series on Murdoch, the documentary, and I just watched Mayor of Easttown, which I thought was fantastic. Have you seen either of those?
I have seen the Rise of the Murdoch Dynasty. Yeah. Yes, I haven't watched Mayor of Easttown. Yeah. I've actually been watching Lupin.
I want you to, if you're going to transition from Lupin to Mayor of Easttown, maybe a drink in between or get up and stretch your legs. You need to that's a crunchy gear change.
So that was John Elmes' interview with George Kay. But wonderfully, I've been joined by a trio of Newswrap hosts. Jesse Whittock is here, John is here, and Hannah Bowler are all here. And we're going to attempt a momentous episode of What We've Been Watching. We're going to look back at 6 months worth of TV and consider what our favourite show has been, and maybe a show that we expected to enjoy but it's just flopped a little bit. We're looking at what's hot, we're looking at what's not. It's the What We've Been Watching special, and we're going to do this every 6 months forever until the podcast ends, which hopefully will never ever happen. Welcome to my team.
Hey Max.
What's up?
Hey team.
Hey Matt. Hey man. How's it going?
Amazing stuff. Yeah, I'm all good, thanks, John. So this is very exciting. I've chalked up loads of enthusiasm for this moment. We've been talking about it for weeks. It comes on the eventuality of our 49th Newswrap podcast. We couldn't quite tie it in with the 50th, but there you go. So we're going to talk about a show that we've really enjoyed over the past 6 months. Jesse Whittock, I'm going to go to you first. What have you been loving over the past 6 months?
Thanks for having me, Max, and for having the idea of putting on this, as you say, momentous What We've Been Watching. I'm just going to say, just to caveat everything, that like the opinions of myself, yourself, Hannah, and John are just that. They're just opinions. So if we offend anyone with our views on the show, just ignore us and move on to the next.
Well said. We don't even know very much about TV, do we, Jesse?
Just ignore the haters, right? That's what I always say.
Absolutely.
But
everyone's a critic.
Exactly. And in this case, that's exactly what we are. So my favourite show of the year so far is, I'm going to represent the international or the US side of things, as I often do, and it's The Flight Attendant, which is HBO Max's really rather brilliant comedy drama series starring Kaylee Cuoco, best known for playing Penny on The Big Bang Theory for many, many years. I'm very glad she's left that absolute dumpster fire of a TV series in the past, because I just think that was a travesty that it ran for so long and was so popular. But not here to bash The Big Bang Theory. Anyway, The Flight Attendant, for those who don't know, played over here on Sky One. It was acquired for Sky One. It wasn't part of the sort of HBO output deal that Sky has. That stuff tends to go on Sky Atlantic. So bought towards the end of last year, and it actually aired in America at the end of last year, but didn't air in the UK until this year. So I'm saying that it qualifies. It comes from the folk Warner Brothers and Greg Berlanti Productions, who've created shows like Riverdale, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and the sort of Arava shows, which are all over American telly. So it's going to be sort of high quality stuff.
Berlanti makes basically everything that's ever been made ever.
He does. He's like this production super guru. And this one basically born out of a deal that Kaylee Cuoco had with Warner Brothers when she came out of Big Bang Theory. She wanted to make a series based on the novel The Flight Attendant. And effectively what it looks at is Kaylee plays this flight attendant, as you might imagine, who effectively is like a total wreckhead, really. And sort of the whole series is kind of following her as she sort of spirals sort of out of control. And it's all based on this mystery plot line where she goes on a flight to Bangkok, meets this like swarthy passenger on the flight, sleeps with that evening, wakes up the next morning and finds him dead. So she basically conceals the evidence that she was anywhere near what happened. And she doesn't know if she had anything to do with it. She can't remember anything. And effectively the plot sort of spirals from there. So she's sort of doing her own kind of gumshoe routine to try and work out what's happened. The FBI quickly get involved. There's a kind of shady international crime group who are chasing her. There's a really good turn from Michelle Gomez, who plays this like psychotic sort of assassin character. Many of you will recognize Michelle's name from Green Wing, C4's almighty sitcom from the 2000s, when she played Sue White, the sort of crazy office manager. And so she's really good. Kaylee's really good. It's a sort of fast-paced show, really good to watch, clearly looks good. But I think besides it just being quite fun, because all of that sounds fine, but like, why would that be your show of the year so far? The sort of really interesting thing is the way that the series kind of like also is able to weave in this story of Cassie, the flight attendant's sort of mental breakdown and her sort of spiral towards full-on alcoholism. She's sort of obviously in way too deep, and she's battling these like really like awful things that have happened in her childhood, and you sort of jump between that and this kind of, you know, hyper-produced American, slightly like schlocky kind of series. And it's interesting because it's almost like the Americans' version on the kind of shows that we've seen over here that have been led by, you know, female either actors or writers that explore mental health. So things like Fleabag, you know, I May Destroy You, I Hate Susie, definitely feels like it's sort of taken some cues from like at least that sort of mindset, if not those shows directly. It's not as good as something like I May Destroy You, which is, you know, in the kind of god pantheon of television, but it's really good, really fun, but also kind of makes you think about sort of the condition of people and people sort of thrown into like crazy situations. So like I'd say if you've got Now TV, or Now as it's now known, or Sky, definitely PVR that, catch it up. It's well worth your time.
Lovely. What a glowing review. I like your comparison to the UK-led female comedy dramas, which has clearly been shape of things that have happened over the past couple of years. Is it quite self-contained, or is there going to be more series?
So they have commissioned a second series, which is going to come out next year. I think the author has written more books around this world that he's created. So there's definitely more source material to work from. And it sort of felt like you could have wrapped the show where it was, but there are equally some quite straightforward threads that they can pull at to set up some new stories. I think there's been some stories going around that in the second series, the flight attendant has become a sort of quasi-CIA operative, which sounds a bit ridiculous, if particularly considering the state that she's in for most of the series and the various crimes that she commits. As she tries to work out like what's going on around there. But yeah, that'll be fun to see. And look, if that's no good, that's fine by me. There's one really good series. It's well worth doing. Kaylee Cuoco's excellent. She's really funny, and but also kind of pulls off the sort of darker sides of the role really well. And it's Greg Berlanti production, so you know, so it looks good and is kind of at the top end of scripting really.
I don't know whether you felt this, Jesse, but it very much had the kind of the other Berlanti SVOD show that I liked recently on a rival Netflix, You. It had that kind of rollicking through the drama type feel, lots of tension, lots of cliffhangers, etc. The one thing that frustrated me, and I bearing in mind I haven't actually finished it, I got to about 5 episodes through and I didn't get bored. I just went on to something else and I haven't gone back to it. I was like, when you screaming out in the first few episodes is that she's absolutely done. I mean, there is so much evidence against her. It feels like it should be wrapped up immediately. That's a watertight case for a prosecutor. I don't want to reveal too much, but like she's in a pretty sticky situation.
Yeah, you definitely have to suspend some of your disbelief at the start of the series, and I think that's definitely. There are some plot holes. It's like I say, it's not a perfect series by any means, but it's definitely one of the most fun watches I've had this year, which is what we've needed, really.
You also forgot Kaylee's top role of all time, 8 Simple Rules.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm glad that you brought it up, Hannah, and I apologise to any 8 Simple Rules fans beyond yourself.
How could you?
We accept your apologies.
Well, let's leave Jesse feeling awful for the next few minutes as he considers his errors. And now we're going to go to Hannah Bowler next. Hannah, you're thinking BBC One. You're thinking entertainment. I
am. I'm going for the curveball of the year, which is This Is My House on BBC One. I would say when it first hit, TV was pretty offended, but then out of nowhere, everyone was like, well, this is weird and it's brilliant. And to be honest, it was, I can't fault it really. So it was made by Expectation and it came out in March, and it was kind of one of these BBC One midweek entertainment along with, was it Gordon Ramsay's Bank Balance? Which also came out midweek, which, to be honest, if you put the two together, it's a competition, to be honest, because that is not a top line I ever wanted to see. No offense to Gordon Ramsay. He's good on Kitchen Nightmares, but let's leave it there. So basically it kind of came out at the same time as there's this big rise in the guessing game format. So we've got like Masked Singer and I Can See Your Voice. But this is something quite different. It's pretty low production values, no shiny floor. And it's all set in the home counties, I think. Like most house, I would say, was in Hitchin, which I'm confused by. But basically there's 4 people who all think or all pretend that they live in one house. And it's fronted by Stacey Dooley, which, again, quite interesting pick. But it's nice to see her doing something that's not her usual repertoire. And she's fun. She clearly just finds the whole thing very funny, very enjoyable, and just, I don't know, you can feel that it just is something outside of our space that's just a bit of light, breezy entertainment other than constantly talking to paedophiles, drug lords and sex offenders. So that's good for Stacey. What's happening at the same time as the 4 actors and 1 real person as they walk around the house and kind of interact with different rounds? There's one that's quite awkward where they get the partner of the person who lives in the house to sit down and kind of like fake stories of how they met are played out, which is awkward and shouldn't work, but it's quite funny. There's also like a kind of, they'll point something out in the house and talk about it and make up a story around it. But obviously only one of them is telling the truth. And then there's a kind of quick fire trivia round at the end, which also trips people up quite well. And then the upshot of it is that one person is revealed to be the true owner of the house. And if they make it through without being guessed, they get the £1,000 prize, which is a very strange prize. Quite cheap, but again, it kind of works with the low budget values. What kind of as well that I really liked about this show, I would say, is that they have like a lineup of celebrities that all talk through what is going on in the house at the same time. And I really enjoyed the mixture of people because on paper, should it work? You've got Bill Bailey, you've got Emily Atack. Put them together, doesn't look right. But on screen, it really works. I mean, it's quite enjoyable. And then I would say they throw in a kind of like an extra celebrity who comes on. And those ones have been also really interesting. I think the first episode had like Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen, which, I mean, that's always fun because I'm a former Changing Rooms fan, so bring him in the loop and great entertainment. It's quite funny seeing this show play out because at first the reviews were somewhat odd. But yeah, over time, it seems like there's a bit of a cult following for the show. I saw one review earlier just titled, "What the hell have I just watched on TV?" So that's the kind of flavor of things that you get from the show. But I think after all of its episodes have come out, I think there's like a little bit bubbling where people are like, do you know what? This is fun and entertaining and just a bit silly, like a bit silly and a bit naff. And that's, I think, what everyone needs right now. So I hope it comes back for a second series. Also, I saw something weird on the internet where one of the characters from the first series described it as the best experience of her entire life participating on the show. So what more do you need?
Wow. That's a glowing review. It was all in the home counties because of coronavirus, because they all put I think it was intended to be, I thought that too, and then I read something about halfway through the series. It was intended to be all in different places. And then in the end, it's so true. They all had it in Hitchin because there was the one episode where the guy couldn't name any clubs in Hitchin. And then it turned out he was the guy.
Yeah, there are clubs in Hitchin, are frequented.
Fantastic red herring, that though. That's really good.
Well, the thing I loved it for several reasons. I almost wanted to have it as my favorite as well, and I really like how you learn to get good at it by just realizing that it's always going to be the awkward ones, because they're not going to if you're an awkward person, you're not going to be on this show if you're pretending. So all the pretenders are the ones who are really good actors and really good at like performing in the rounds and whatnot, and then all the awkward ones. So my favorite one was the Hitchin guy. And he had to say the dance at his wedding and then do the dance at his wedding. And he forgot what the main song was at his wedding. And then when he tried to do the dance, it was just like the most uncomfortable thing that anyone's pretty much ever seen. And it turned out to be his house.
Yeah, he forgot so many things about his own life because clearly put on the spot, he was like, I don't know what is reality and what's not.
I also love the fact that a BBC One sort of 9 p.m. entertainment show, and like you say, Hannah, it's like pretty low budget, but the fact of the matter is it's got this like kind of quite prominent slot. It was just like so willing to be like sort of so like dowdry in the sense that a £1,000 prize just creates so little jeopardy in the kind of pantheon of the sort of things that we're used to, you know, people winning like recording contracts and people winning, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds and people winning £1 million on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And this is just £1,000 for a pretty, you know, due to the coronavirus, as you say, generally quite well-off people who £1,000 probably doesn't make any difference to. So there was just absolutely zero jeopardy, and I kind of think that adds to the whole kind of weird sort of culty kitschness of the show. I mean, I loved it as well. I thought it was brilliant. I
completely agree on the celebrities, and someone described it to me as it's a bit like Celebrity Gogglebox. There's like this little element of it that is like, it's really enjoyable watching celebrities watch this all play out in real time. I don't know if they were forced to do that because of COVID, to have the celebrities in a different place and do it all via Zoom, but whether they were forced to do it or not, I just love that element. Jamali Maddox, so funny, really, really funny.
Because like it still hasn't rated that well. I think it was like 2.4 million consolidated. So I don't even think that many people have seen it. And the people I've spoken to outside of telly are like, just is a bit indifferent to it. But I think definitely within these circles, it's been a rave success.
John Elmes, international editor of Broadcast. You're not allowed to say Lupin, by the way, John.
No, I was tempted by Lupin because it is one of those shows which you watch and get hooked on and is very good. No, I'm conversely to Jesse. I'm as international editor, I'm going for a very uniquely British show. Not uniquely British in terms of subject matter, but the focus was uniquely British. So Channel 4's HIV drama, It's a Sin, was just quite simply a breathtaking piece of television on so many levels. The subject matter it tackled is something that is really difficult to kind of, I would imagine, well, Russell T Davies, the writer, I should start back, said that he failed to get this past commissioners at the BBC and ITV, and before Channel 4 picked it up, there were some reservations on that part, with the subject matter being quite weighty and too weighty for a TV drama that's outside of an SVOD service, which tackles weightier dramas, or can do. And the series itself is about the 1980s AIDS crisis, specifically in focusing on London in the UK. Russell T Davies, a creator, is a gay man himself, and he drew heavily on his experiences in that time. It follows 5 18-year-olds, Richie, Roscoe, Colin, Jill and Ash. One might expect it to be super sad and super heart-wrenching, and it is in spades. It's one of the most emotional pieces of drama I've seen in the last decade, let alone last year. But it was incredibly heart-wrenching and poignant. But that is not its defining point. One of the beauties, one of the things that made It's a Sin such an important piece of TV for me to watch was it was joyous. There was so much joy in the series. It isn't about the crushing horror of such a scary and a disease that was an affliction that was so unknown about, had so much misinformation about it at the time, and there's obviously now we've learned so much more. And I think the reason that it struck such a profound note is that quite a lot of people have consigned the 1980s AIDS crisis to a kind of a moment of horror for the world, which was, articulated by a really scary advert where John Hurt gave this really doom-laden, monologue about how AIDS was coming for everyone, and there was a crashing tombstone, and it's included in loads of 50 scariest moments on TV lists. And this drama, yes, it has the sadness and the horror and the pain that the disease caused and the lack of understanding around it, but also embraces the joy which the participants in the drama really had, and kind of there was a wonderful bon vivant element to it, and it made for just a complete piece of TV. It had humor, it had sadness, it had music. It was acting. It felt at many times like a musical on screen without ever falling into the slightly, kitsch and jazz hands aspect that sometimes musical TV can do. And it just had a really fantastic element. I think one of the other aspects that made it so important was of the main cast, Ollie Alexander and Lydia West were probably the most well known. But the other actors, Callum Scott Howells, Amari Douglas, and Nathaniel Curtis, I don't think have been on the real mainstream awareness of actors. Whereas the supporting cast, people like Keely Hawes, Stephen Fry, Neil Patrick Harris, are bona fide A-list stars. So it really flipped that. It presented the kind of the more upcoming acting community to tell its story. And the supporting cast were the more well known, and that really resonated because they were young people in the story. They were young actors being cast. The cast was also extremely diverse, and Russell T Davies made a point of casting gay characters in the roles to really give the extra level authenticity. So in terms of a drama piece, it had everything for a TV industry. It was authentic, it was well acted, it was well written, it had all the great elements of storytelling, and it covered and it informed and educated as well as entertained. I mean, it was perfect public service broadcasting.
Beautiful. It should have been on the BBC, clearly. So this is the thing. Post it coming out, it absolutely smashed records for Channel 4 and has done wonders on its catch-up service and VOD service, all 4. And it's one of those dramas that when it lands, the people who turn it down will just be like, that was a foolhardy mistake. What a lovely glowing review. I don't have much to add. I enjoyed the juxtaposition between that and This Is My House. I think we couldn't have got two more different shows. But
I should add that I did also. It's a Sin is my favourite drama of the year.
No, you can't say that now. Retrospect.
It really, really struck a chord. I mean, I was in floods of tears at the end. Me and my fiance were completely warmed, but also absolutely devastated because it is so sad and happy at the same time. A wonderful mix of emotions.
Fantastic stuff. Really enjoyed that review, John. Thanks very much. But I'm going to have a go too, even as host. So a show that I thought that myself, John and Jesse were going to tussle over a little bit because we were messaging a lot about this at the time was BBC Two's Gods of Snooker, which was on quite recently actually and is still available on iPlayer. It's from Mindhouse Productions, which is Louis Theroux's company, which I might go on to talk about in a minute. I get quite frustrated with a lot of documentaries at the moment in the sense that they just follow a very similar pattern. So that sort of in thing of having all the people in the dock sit down on a chair in a dark room and approach the chair in a very similar way, and they sort of do that little cough before they start talking. Loads of archive, no narrator. I feel like narrators are just like so out of fashion at the moment. And some of these documentaries are very good, don't get me wrong. Once Upon a Time in Iraq, etc., etc. But I think documentaries, for me, it feels, especially on the BBC, have sort of fallen into this pattern. And I worried a little bit that Gods of Snooker might follow that pattern. I also just thought it might be a little bit dull, but actually it's by far and away my show of the year. I was reading this just after I'd watched it. Joel Golby, who wrote a piece for The Guardian, was tweeting about it. And he said, the best documentaries make you care about something you've never thought about for 1 second in your life. And I just thought it was brilliant, a really brilliant sentence to summarize Gods of Snooker, which actually I have to counter doesn't in any way apply to my enjoyment of Gods of Snooker because I fucking love snooker. So I'd actually been to the Crucible about a week or two prior to watching it, which just like really made me want to watch it even more, especially as the Crucible was one of, if not the first event to return properly after COVID. So we were part of one of those event pilots. So Joel Golby's point doesn't apply, but I have spoken to several people who don't like snooker, who watched the show ever since, who really, really enjoyed it. And I think there are several reasons for that. I think one of the main ones is it took what currently is perceived to be a quite dull, quite uncool sport. It's almost like a play. It's played indoors. Everyone wears a waistcoat and you have to be very quiet and you can't drink while you're watching it. And it just gave it this ultimate like rock and roll sheen. And I couldn't believe that snooker could feel so rock and roll before watching this 3-part documentary series. And it's all, so the first episode focuses on the late Alex Hurricane Higgins, and it comes back to him throughout the series. But the first step is mainly focused on him. He won 2 world championships and he's kind of like the main character. He was sort of the Ronnie O'Sullivan of his day, although he makes Ronnie O'Sullivan appear quite tepid and boring, really, when you watch some of this documentary. But everything is really encapsulated by Alex the Hurricane Higgins. And it just hits you immediately. Like, one of the first scenes is a press conference he did when he was absolutely out of his tree and he was nearing the end of his career. You can't believe that stuff like that was going on in the late 1980s in snooker, of all sports. But that's right at the start. And from there, it really sets the tone for what I believe to be a really high quality documentary, for which I learned loads of, again, something that I feel quite well educated in, but I got a really good feel for what was going on at the time. And while Joel Golby's comment really applies in terms of this being a documentary that anyone can enjoy, it also is really great for snooker fans, and it showed loads of the snooker, and you found yourself almost on the edge of your seat, especially in the 1985 final, which was watched by 18.5 million people and went down to the last black. Crazy. But again, you really feel that atmosphere. So the first episode focuses on Alex the Hurricane Higgins, who really is a fantastic character. But throughout these 3 episodes, it really avoids the rigidity of certain other documentaries. So we don't have one person per episode. There's not particularly a chronology. It sort of does make its way through the 1980s, but it certainly jumps between, and it often goes back actually to the late 70s. The second episode brings in quite a few more characters. I was amazed that Steve Davis, who won most of the world championships in that decade, but has nicknames such as the Robot and Interesting in an ironic way, was also just made to be super interesting in a non-ironic way. Like, somehow they managed to rock and roll up Steve Davis, which is really, really difficult for anyone who watches snooker regularly, as snooker fans will all attest to. And then Jimmy White comes into the third episode. Again, I had no idea that Jimmy White was anything other than your average snooker player. It turns out he was almost as much of a nutter as Alex the Hurricane Higgins, and he comes out with potentially the greatest quote that we'll hear this year or possibly the next decade. If cocaine is the devil's dandruff, then taking crack is like sucking the devil's, insert the final word here. I don't really need to say it on this podcast. And suddenly you're just like, what am I even watching? This is about snooker. But Jimmy White is coming out with these absolute crazy lines. So I loved the self-contained nature of the story. I loved how you really get a feel for the time. So I'm very interested in the 1980s anyway. And it just, it almost made you feel like you were there. It's like a modern historical doc. It put me in mind, it was a completely different subject matter, but it actually put me in mind quite a lot of the Channel 4 Jade Goody documentary from last year. Subject matter utterly different, but you really, the reason I probably would have said the Jade Goody doc if we'd been doing this a year ago, and the reason that I enjoyed that so much was you so got a feel for the mid-noughties, didn't you, watching that? It captures everything with the music and the footage and the quality, and Gods of Snooker did exactly the same thing, and I think that's another reason why a non-snooker fan would really enjoy it. And clearly one of the reasons that snooker hit the heights of popularity in the 1980s was because the unemployment rate was really high, and working class people who'd lost their jobs were watching snooker. And again, the 18.5 million in the 1985 final kind of like encapsulates that. But there was loads of really cool scenes with various funny snooker players out on speedboats and in clubs and whatnot. And just as I thought I might get a bit bored in the third one, Jimmy White just turns up and really just like continues it. But there was loads of emotion throughout. Anyone who wasn't crying at the end when Jimmy White was carrying Alex Hurricane Higgins' casket at his funeral, I don't know, your heart is as black as the ace of spades. It's making me emotional just thinking about it. That was a really beautiful moment. It was very sad to follow through the demise of Alex Higgins. And these snooker players were just everything about them was there to see, really, like regardless of whether they were contributing to the documentary or had passed away or had chosen not to contribute to the documentary. You got a feel for every element of their lives, which is something that really, really impressed me. And Louis Theroux's Mindhouse. So I kind of rolled my eyes slightly when I found out that the first non-presenting documentary that Louis Theroux's company was going to be putting out was about snooker. I just thought the whole thing felt a bit arbitrary and not very youth skewing. But it turns out that him and Aaron Fellows, who run Mindhouse together, clearly have a really good eye for this stuff, and it moved through seamlessly, and the use of archive was great. We've talked about what's hot, but we do have to talk about what's not. And once again, disclaimer, this is very much the personal opinion of the broadcast employees. Jesse, what was your flop of the first 6 months of this year?
To start with, I'll say I think it's been a pretty brilliant 6 months of telly. I think there hasn't been that much that's really kind of fallen under the level of expectation when you think about things like It's a Sin and, those sorts of shows where the expectation was super high and it clearly like met those expectations and went past them. So I was it took a while for me to kind of get to a point where I was thinking to sort of really remember what it was. But then it jumped out to me that, I don't know, about just after we'd finished The Flight Attendant, actually, me and my wife, we were looking for something else to sort of episodic to watch. And we went for Netflix's The Irregulars, which is a Drama Republic produced sort of fantasy, sort of supernatural mystery period drama-y thing. The fact that I can't actually tell you what it is right now is a sign that I didn't like it. And it's basically, it's about these characters from the Sherlock Holmes sort of world called the Baker Street Irregulars, who turn up in 2 or 3 of Arthur Conan Doyle's novels or stories. A bit of a weird one. I couldn't really tell you whether it's supposed to be a kind of show of the week sort of thing, or if it was supposed to be a serialized kind of, carefully plotted series. Every episode had its own story, and there was an overarching story running through it, but it was hard to get through, I'll say. And in fact, I will admit I didn't get through it. I got to about episode 6 and just found it all too disappointing, really. I didn't have massive expectations for it, but there was something tonally off about it. The acting was pretty good. There was some good young talent in there. Thadia Graham, I think, is a name that we'll hear going forwards. Harrison Osterfeld, Darcy Shaw. These are all very young actors and actresses who did as good as they could have done with what was kind of some quite shonky scripts, to be honest. Comes from a guy called Tom Bidwell, who also helmed Netflix's Watership Down adaptation 2018, so that was quite well received. He's clearly a talented guy. Looks great. This series, the Victorian London that they create, was pretty good. Some of the effects were okay, but it just doesn't hang together. And unfortunately, for me, it was a bit of a fail, so I'm going to put it up there as my flop of the year. Sorry, Drama Republic.
Good stuff. A fine anti-review. I thought Watership Down also not too well received. Because the rabbits looked funny.
Yes, that was a criticism. I'm not sure how much Tom Bidwell could have done about that.
No, sorry, Tom.
It certainly got better reviews than The Irregulars. I'll say that.
Well, that's Jesse. He's had his moment in the sun there with his anti-review. How about you, John? What was your flop of the year?
Yeah, again, I echo Jesse's thoughts in terms of flops. This year's been a pretty damn good year for TV. I mean, even if you don't like a series, it's invariably done well in most quarters or rated well. The show that I am calling my flop is very much in that camp, in the sense it rated well and it seemed to get a lot of positive thought from most people. But for me, Hattrick Mercurio Productions BBC One 4-part thriller Bloodlands was my flop of the year. Starring James Nesbitt, it promised lots of great things because it comes from Jed Mercurio. It comes from the wheelhouse of Jed Mercurio, although it's written by a new writer, Chris Brandon, which is great. I think in actual fact, some of the writing was a good part of the series. But that being said, I remember particularly in the first episode, there was some tortured dialogue between James Nesbitt's opening character and I'm trying to remember who it was, but it was I remember thinking, I was like, oh gosh, that line felt so delivered that it really, really didn't hold far. But basically, it's a cold case detective thriller, which is great. I mean, I love those. They work really well on TV, and this one really did work well on TV. It rated very highly. Set in Northern Ireland, and it centres on a cold case emerging from the time of the Troubles in North and Southern Ireland. And there are just quite a lot of plot holes, things that seem so obvious when in the opening episode, there was a moment where they look at the wrong tree, or they're looking from the wrong place at an island where they're looking for this specific tree, and they start digging in this spot. And then they suddenly realize on this tiny island that the other tree that's just over the ridge is the one they're supposed to be doing it. And then James Nesbitt does this whole, we've got to find something, and grabs a shovel and starts digging. And it's supposed to be symbolic of his pain at needing to find something because it's wrapped up with his own wife's death in the past. And it just felt so acted and over delivered. And then the series continues, but the big reveal, and there is a big reveal because there's often a big reveal with a Jed Mercurio inspired drama or influenced drama comes in, I believe, either the end of the second episode or the end of the third episode or the beginning of the third episode. I think it's the end of the second episode. By episode 3, you've kind of gone, well, kind of the jeopardy and the mystery that is surrounding a lot of this drama has just been revealed to me. And now I'm just waiting for it to kind of climax. And it climaxes. And I went, well, the ending was okay. And probably if they leave it there, that'll be good. And then I think within hours, possibly the next morning, that it found out it had been renewed for a second series. And I knew that was a possibility, but I was didn't want it to be renewed. Not for not wanting business. I just felt it could have ended then and would have probably just had that self-contained. So despite promising so much and despite having some really good elements, Bloodlands is sadly my flop of the year.
Well, it did very well in the ratings. 6 million people disagree with you, John.
Absolutely.
Although maybe they won't. That was the amount who watched the first episode. So who knows how many of that 6 million completely agree with you, John? I take that back. But thank you. I think that did it very well. And it was a bit of a shame because it's a Jed Mercurio's indie production, but he's blooding young writers.
Yep.
And so maybe a bit of a shame in this instance that it didn't tickle your fancy.
Absolutely. And who knows? I mean, second series might be great. And it also it led into the start of Line of Duty Series 7. So it worked well for the BBC and had a nice continuum.
There you go. Hannah, it's your turn. What's been flopping?
I'll keep it short and sweet. And I also, to caveat this, I think Rose Matafeo is hilarious at stand-up and absolutely excellent on panel shows. I literally love and adore her. And through gritted teeth, do I kind of make comments on a female-led, female-written comedy. So I'm very sorry. But I just struggled with her comedy Starstruck. It was a BBC 3 HBO co-pro from Avalon that came out, I think, in April this year. Again, it was one of those shows that really promised so much on paper. And I just struggled slightly with the dialogue, and it was a little bit cliched and a little bit stereotypical conversations. Kind of millennial woman in her 20s, dead end job, talking about her having a period, just those kind of things that you expect to happen and you expect to be talked about. And it just felt a little bit too cliched, and I wanted something that was just a bit different, I think. So that was it for me. I know it's been really well reviewed and most people I speak to absolutely love it. So I feel bad that it's kind of not hit as well for me. A few of the other elements that I found a little bit hard was, so I thought Rose's acting was really great. She was really fun and breezy and landed all of her lines brilliantly. Her love interest, Tom, who was played Nikesh Patel, found him a bit stuffy. And maybe not stuffy, but his character just didn't really have like an edge to him. And I kind of want in a love interest, I don't know, he was a bit square. So that was one element that I found hard. And there was also one scene where he was meeting with his agent, and that was just full of cliches, the kind of bougie female agent who wants him to do this and this type of show, but he just really wants to like play more meaningful roles. So as I say, Rose is very funny and really well acted. I just felt everyone else around her was just a bit, just too cliched. And I think it kind of comes in this realm of those kind of female POV series like Fleabag, but it just didn't have that edge to it that I kind of was hoping for in a kind of female comedian POV series that is kind of having a bit of a boom time at the moment. But I mean, everyone else seems to love it. It's already been renewed for a second series. John Scoop over there. So yeah, that would be my flop.
That is what this category is. Didn't deliver what we hoped. So that was Hannah on Starstruck. I find myself agreeing with you as well. The agent scene was like the most cliched agent scene of all time. And I'm sure there have been plenty of cliched agent scenes. I'm going to be super quick. I'm not going to do any caveats though, because we've all done caveats before we've started saying the show that didn't quite meet our expectations. But mine is actually another BBC show, and it's BBC One's entertainment format, I Can See Your Voice. So I got really into The Masked Singer this year. I didn't enjoy the first series of The Masked Singer that much, but I really liked the second one. It might have been a pandemic thing. It was just like quite a fun watch. It's a fun guessing game. Guessing game formats are all the rage. We've already brought that up. And so BBC One went for a reboot of the South Korean format, I Can See Your Voice. I think it might prove that not necessarily do the broadcasters need to bet on every South Korean format. It just felt I only watched the first episode, and I found it to be quite stale from the beginning. The vague approach is that you get 5 contestants. You don't know whether they can sing or not. They lip sync. They'll be like a teacher or a policeman or whatever. So it borrows the Masked Singer's like calling these people by their profession or calling them by their hobby or something. They sing. They lip sync. You don't know whether they can sing or not, and then you discover as you go through the judges are guessing, and there was very little jeopardy to it. I didn't enjoy the actual guessing element particularly. Like, I don't think it's particularly fun guessing whether someone can sing or not. That's just quite an arbitrary thing to guess. Whereas obviously on The Masked Singer, you're like trying to guess whether someone's like Glenn Hoddle or Terry Venables. I think that's a hell of a lot better. The Masked Dancer, we won't even talk about that. But for me, format didn't work. I didn't think the judges were particularly good. I think it suffered a little bit. You know, some shows have really thrived having to be made under COVID conditions. I'm not sure this one did. Without an audience, it did, unfortunately, I think, feel a little bit amateur. Paddy McGuinness is absolutely everywhere. It came up against ITV's Game of Talents at exactly the same time by the same producer, Thames, and I haven't seen Game of Talents, so I can't comment on that, but it was interesting how they were going up against each other. Its ratings were fine. I don't know whether it will be renewed for a second series or not, but for me, I expected quite a lot and didn't come away with very much. Thank you for listening to the Broadcast Newswrap. I've been Max Goldbart, and you've been listening to the wonderful George Kay, creator of Lupin, plus my colleagues, John Elmes, Hannah Bowler, and Jesse Whittock. You can catch all 48 previous episodes of the Newswrap on Spotify, iTunes, or on our website at www.broadcastnow.co.uk.